Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 387 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to attempt to smooth out our gold science production by buffing up tungsten, steel, and acid. Enjoy. The launches continue. We are waiting on protection fields and fusion reactors due to the orbs just taking time to make. And we are making more. However, it looks like we are short on the paste. And that is probably something we can upgrade here. And who knows how much we'll need, but let's just throw speed modules into everything. Well, that's certainly going faster now. It is indeed sending more trucks, so this should get faster now. Oh, it looks like we never hooked up the iron here, but it kind of doesn't matter if this paste doesn't make it all the way down. So we kind of need to wait for them to get back. That's an interesting place just to have a couple of stone bricks. Guess we just had extras in the inventory at some point anyway. But it'll take a few moments for those drones to get back. But for now, we can analyze what we need to do to make our gold science faster. And whenever you have a build and it's not running at full speed, the best way to figure out what the most limiting factor is to see the resource that is moving at full speed. And we can see that it is the tungsten here. That the rest of these resources are moving, but they're not moving at maximum speed, either maximum speed of the belt, or it's just they have not fully compressed their belt. And that is a limiting factor, at least for now. There could be other limiting factors, but that's the primary one. So the first thing we need to upgrade is our tungsten. And then when we do so, we'll figure out what the next limiting thing is. And that makes sense if we go back to our master plan here, that we knew that we would need a huge amount of tungsten powder. And out of all of the things that go into gold, that was essentially the hardest because we needed 236 tungsten plates and the 220 tungsten powder. And if we go to our gold plan here, we broke it down to needing 274 tungsten powder a second. If we can feed that, we will feed this whole setup. And we have an upgraded build here, making the tungsten powder. And let's go back a little bit to our plan where this thing can make 120 a second. So if we built 3 of these, we would get what we need. Fortunately, it's just barely more than 2. And it's possible that this whole thing might be able to create that output on its own, but it wasn't built with that in mind. So we may find some limiting factor somewhere. So let's say we wanted to upgrade this to 150 items a second. Would we be able to and still have this 2 into 2 into 4 into 4 into 2 setup without changing too much? So we do 150, and unfortunately it's just slightly too much. However, the gold only needs 274.5, so divided by 2 is 137.25. So if we put that in there, can we do this? And look at that, we can. It's very close, but it will fit. And let's see here, has this caught up? Looks like it. We have lots of paste. So now we can make the regular orbs. Assuming that all of this makes it down, which it doesn't. That's alright, it's a lower priority than the ones that are above it. So that's actually alright if they're waiting for this stuff to make it down. There's only so much of it available after all. So let's jump over to this setup. And before we forget, make sure that we do these module changes. The ones that need to be changed are these ones right here. And it would have green belts. Okay. So we know if we built a second one of these, it would work. So now we need to look at feeding the nice 69 tungsten ore a second into this. But now that we have 2 of them, we're going to need a double nice amount of tungsten. The setup we have now is right here. And believe it or not, it actually does quite a bit of output, 119. However, that is a little short of a double nice amount of resources. If we built a second line of these, could our factory feed it? We don't need that much more than this. We only need about 10 or 15 more. So building a whole second line of it is kind of overkill. But there's also really no extra room to put another one, and we certainly don't want to put speed modules in here. We definitely want to use productivities. But could our factory support using a few more of those? Probably. It is the expensive tier 4 crystals here, and they are derived from tier 3. But we have a triage logic in place, and right now, all of these warehouses are basically at 100%. So I think our factory could easily support more. Okay then, let's jump down here, and we need to do a second line. Even though we only need a little bit more, let's just do a whole second line because, hey, it fits. I was also not thinking that we are getting more of these resources from the crystallizers. It's kind of hard to say exactly how much we're making from them, because it's not like all of these crystallizers are on all the time, but a lot of them are. Let's say half of them were on all the time. That would create 5.4, which, although helpful, is unfortunately not enough. Okay then. Let's grab a whole second line. Wonder if that radar actually needs to be there. Guess we'll see if there's a radar hole in a second. But we'll place this in here. It fits. And it is going to be a little awkward shooting these resources in. I'll just leave the bottom ones as blue, because it doesn't really matter too much. The same logic to this still applies, so let's just grab the signal. And since we've done this once before, hopefully we can just copy this down. Huh. These things are pointed the wrong way. Looks like everything else is right. Using twice as much of this might very well stress the ore bus here, but it does have the triage logic to make sure they get used where it most makes sense, so we'll just have to fire it up and just see if it causes issues. Everything is here, which means we've got a whole nother line of tungsten. And it looks like the logic works because it's pulsing like the other side is. Well, we're going to need twice as much of this, and the only belt that can handle a nice amount of items is a green one. And they have already been upgraded to green. So we've got this, and the whole setup should basically be good. The only thing that would need to be upgraded are these belts to green. Since we're going to be building 2 of these setups, if we want to reuse this machine, we can put a second speed module in there, which means it's now below 0.5 of the hydro plants, which means this one plant can just stay there. And can we do the same with this? Unfortunately, no. We are going to need a second one. Let's pick one of these. How about the science blueprint? Because we need to carefully copy the relevant things. We don't need it to snap. It would be something like this, and it would need to be high enough up where it's not competing with space. Let's just pull all of that out for now. How about that too? Because then if we line this up, it would be like this. And let's put it up there. Let's see. The fuel belt will continue. Let's just upgrade that to red. This will definitely need to be a green belt. Doesn't really need to be green on those 2 sides. But it quickly hops in there. Looks like the ammonia machine needs its resources. That's all going. And we have our 2 new belts of resources, which means now we're going to have a total of 4. Well, it might be a little cleaner if we went into the middle like this. And it's annoyingly 1 square off here. I can't help myself but fix it. There we go. Okay. Let's see what this does. And specifically, if we can keep up with it. Now, this setup will not create 4 full belts. It'll be a little bit less than that. We only need to do the 274.5, and we're making a few items more than that. Still pretty close to the maximum, but this is technically enough for our science. And you can see, at least right now, it is pulsing, which is odd. And that's because this isn't connected. Because it can't be. So let's get that in there. Well, it's going to run at full blast for a while anyway. So the thing we need to check when we're looking at all of our machines is that basically the ore processors are the limiting factor here in this build. So they're the ones that need to run at full blast. And of course, if the whole setup stops, then clearly there's some kind of issue. Looks like the limiting factor is this belt right here. So I guess we're going to have to upgrade to purple. That is a lot of fluorite. Hopefully it has somewhere to go. Because I suppose we could eventually clog on the fluorite. And wow, looks like even this belt is too slow as well. But it could just be some big buffers it needs to work through. But it looks like it has. Well, one of these belts has filled up because we have some logic right here. Has to have more than 200, but there's only 100 in there. How about more than 50? We're down to 7 gigawatts because not much is happening right now. But let's follow these resources back to where they're being consumed and see what happens. There's probably going to be a big buffer it's going to have to work through. But if we can get this belt to pulse a little bit, then that means that tungsten is no longer the limiting factor, and then something else will be running at full blast. Certainly starting to fill up here. And that tungsten is slowly working its way back. So we are absolutely making it faster than we can consume it here. But all of these items need to actually get back to where the science packs are being produced. So until that happens, we aren't going to see much change here. So there we go, we're starting to receive the missing items, which is then going to start using the other ones, which will expose the new limiting factor. Starting to make more and more gold here. And if we look carefully, it's kind of hard to tell because it's a green belt and it's moving very fast, but it is pulsing, which means it is not the limiting factor anymore. Power use is definitely starting to ramp up, 35 gigawatts or so. Most of it going into labs, but of course it goes into lots of other stuff as well, mostly science assembling machines. And in total, for our 75 gold science a second, we need to have 11 of these random number analyzers. So looking at this belt, it's a red belt, so half of this would be 15, and does it look like we're getting about 11 or so? Yeah, probably. We only need to have 8.45 machines, and each setup has 3, so in total we have 12. And when we look at the design, these bearings are a limiting factor, where if we have 4 setups, and each setup has 3 machines, it basically barely has enough assembling machines. So that was one of the limiting factors. If the bearing machines are running at full blast, then everything should be balanced. And we're getting reasonably close to having this belt filled out here. I mean, research is certainly going quick. We almost have the spaceship command here, which means it's time for Faster Than Light Theory D2, or the first big research that is going to seriously test our gold science here. Let's see, one thing we can do is check our productivity over the past minute. We need to have these right here, and it looks like it just dropped down a little bit, so something kind of shut down. But prior to that, we were doing about 690 a minute, so divided by 60 gives us 11.5, and that's about what we were expecting. Ooh, that's some lag there. The biters must be attacking. Oh yes, they are. They attacked in a big wave and pretty much everywhere. Well, that's more orbs. That's a lot of orbs. Oh man. They attack in the thousands and thousands every time, which is why things get so laggy. So how come these things drop down? One of these setups must not be producing them at full speed anymore. It doesn't have the thermal energy store, which doesn't have the cobalt steel. And the cobalt steel, strangely enough, seems fine. Ah, I think I see it. Is it really just that simple? I don't think so, because this pipe isn't connected on this last machine. Because that only gives us one more machine. It's certainly an error, but I don't think that's going to be enough to fix it. Well, but at the same time, it's not like all of those machines need to be running at full blast, because we will have 12 of them in total, but we only need 11, so some of them can pulse some of the time. So it could be our production rate of these was higher just because we had buffers. So I don't immediately see an issue. Well, there we go. Alright, we found it. The steel is not here. 6 drones are on the way, but it doesn't have the resources. So we probably need to buff steel up a bit. But nonetheless, we are getting quite a bit of gold science, even as is. And the gigawatts are up to 46. So we should see steel moving at basically full, and that is what we're seeing here. So the next limiting factor is getting more steel out of this, and you can see all of the steel going to the side. being sent towards the science bus, but we need more. So going back to our plan here, we need a total of 66.85, or let's just say 75 in total. And how much does this setup make? Surprisingly enough, it's actually not that far off. Although all of this is going at full speed, it seems like if we just squeeze a little bit more out of this, it'll be enough. Let's check our science plan to see if steel is needed for any of these other setups. And it absolutely is. We're going to need to add everything together, because in the end it's 6.49 coils, and then times 4 to find out how many ingots we would need. So about 25. Let's break this down using the steel sheet coils, and no productivities or anything goes in there. So then we'll need molten steel, and it can come from lots of sources, but because we need so much of it, we should probably prioritize one of these other methods just to spread the load around, because although things like manganese are going to be in large quantities, if we do it with, say, nickel and cobalt, we'll just need less steel. And steel is very expensive to make. And I'm guessing we probably have a lot of nickel on hand, maybe less so with cobalt, but they're holding just fine, so I imagine we could spread that. So out of all these, let's assume the priority one is going to be this. And now we know how many steel ingots we'll need. So backing out of this, we can look for the other things that steel goes into, and that is the cobalt steel here. And let's do the productivity modules to simulate having the best of everything, which we would. And then it needs to come from the cobalt and the regular steel, and that's a nice amount of steel there. And backing out again, now we have a number of 82.17. And also cobalt is 47, which is easy enough to do, and of course very little nickel. So we have a number, 82.17. It does have to be more than one belt, and we can make this a little higher. We probably should, but I kind of just want to figure out what we're dealing with here. Because right now we have 14 machines, and clearly one speed module will be quite effective here. It's going to take a lot of oxygen, but it's doable. So we'll update all of those, and the input is 328, which is annoying because that means we need 5 green belts. Can never be easy. Also, all of the tungsten has run out. Well, it's going. Kind of. No hydrogen fluoride gas because no hydrofluoric acid. And that is down here. It's trying to go at full blast. That's actually quite an incredible amount of hydrofluoric acid at that. But I suppose it is not enough. That's because we're maxed out on lime. And are no drones coming to get it? I guess not. Well, the biggest consumer of lime here is all of this glass. So let's do like 20 drones worth and swing around and say the input comes from the right. Not sure if it matters, but we will swing it around onto the same side of the belt here just to make sure it gets absolute priority. Here we go. Hopefully that is enough. Actually running low on sulfuric acid because that basically uses the whole factory's worth. I kind of want to send a separate pipe for this, but also we are down to the last warehouse of explosives. But let's just do a pipe. This will bypass the main sulfuric acid pipe for the pipe bus, which will greatly cut down on the amount of resources that need to be delivered to this, because we're already kind of starting to max out on sulfuric acid here, so this ought to help a little bit. And looks like we are having trouble getting rid of all of our fluorite. And I guess that makes sense because we are attempting to use all of it here. And it looks like we are running into some clogs. That our giant bus of acids is just not fast enough. We are using this belt right here for the sulfur. And if we take this back here, we will gain an extra slot. We've got a lot of acid stuff we have to handle, but that clears that back up. And now it's just going into here. So that lime should have made it to glass. And it did. Let's make sure it has priority. It sure seems like it. Seems like this other one is occasionally running, but as long as we mostly have priority for this side, it should be fine. Well, as far as the fluorite goes, with fluoric acid, it seems like the biggest use is going to be the tungsten. So if we need about 280 of the powder, that means we need 263 fluoric acid, which technically only would come from one liquefier if it had all of the fluorite that it needed. And it looks like it gets a lot of what it needs from that setup up there, and it would probably make a lot of sense to make the fluoric acid up there rather than sending it all the way down here, because that would really save on logistics. But what this tells us is in the end we would need 22.28 of fluorite, and that source is right here. And we absolutely can supply that. So it's probably just a huge buffer that it's trying to go through. But the problem with this though is that if we try to make all this fluoric acid up here, we would then need the huge amount of sulfuric acid, which would also create its own problems. So perhaps doing it in this way does actually help a little bit. But what it does mean though is we should expect to see a mostly full belt coming through here, and it basically seems like that's what's happening. But are we actually producing the fluorite as fast as we can? No, not really. And actually, when we look at this, the total number is 63.64, and this only allows 60 to go through. So it's technically not fast enough. So we'll let those upgrades take place. And before we get too distracted, we should probably make the last spaceship part that we need. It probably won't take very long, but since we can make it, we should get started. And that's the command center, leaving just the FTL drive, which is the end result of the faster than light theory research. Making the command center is pretty straightforward. There's nothing too crazy about it. And the one buffed up request chest should be enough for this. Let's just lower these numbers down to something that's reasonable. How about that? Okay, there we go. Making the part. And since the rocket is available, it should immediately launch. Almost done. There it is. It gets picked up. Placed in the top left. And there it goes. Awesome. Now we just need to get this research done. And actually, being at 4% already is pretty decent. Our research speed is moving along. It's certainly not going at full blast, but it's also not that far away from full blast. And it looks like the acid upgrades have more or less made it here, because the two limiting machines are down here, the ore processors, and they appear to be going at basically full blast, and on this setup too. And certainly we've got hydrofluoric acid available. It's not much, and I kind of feel like because it's coming from so far away that we should have a tank in here just to get this maxed out because it's coming from so far. But as you can see, the number is going up, so we are making enough. We just have to wait it out. Okay then, so our limiting factor now is still steel, and it's doing what it can here. I feel like it's not completely maxed out. All the machines are green, but I feel like it could be going faster. Well, looking at our calculation here, we need to have the tiniest bit more than 4 belts going into this. So we probably have to cut it off at the end for these two and have one more going in. And I feel like if we did that, we won't have any limitations anymore. It does seem to be pulsing a little bit. We'll figure that out in a second here, because we need to follow this down the line. We have the best method of making the iron, and we're just kind of repeating what we've already done here. And let's not worry about modules yet, because when we take it down to its source, we're going to need 164 iron ore, which is only a little bit more than we're currently making. So that's not too much of an issue. Also, although all of this has stopped, we do want to prioritize this method here that uses nickel. So instead of having the requirement that either of these ores are high, let's just unhook all of this logic together. I'll still leave it there in case for some reason we want to check on it later. But for now, we'll leave it connected. And this has the highest priority, so it will always run, which is what we want. And it does have a logic here, making sure we have at least 900 ingots in this warehouse. So it is pulsing a little bit, but it's pretty close to maximum. Let's see what we can do. Well, we have 8 machines. So let's put some modules in here to get it down to 8. 1 speed module. Well, okay. Then it's pretty much exactly the same as the rest of those. But we have to get the machines upgraded first. And then we have 40 of these pellet presses, but we have the final tier of pellet press, which that by itself will get what we need. So pellet press 1 to pellet press 4. That is a big upgrade. And we also have 20. But we have the 4th tier, and 1 speed module will do it. Okay. Let's upgrade those with the same modules. Of course, we'll need to upgrade the belts too, but that's the easy part. And for the OCD among you, this has been there a long time. I think that was there to make something fit there, but it no longer applies. But at least it is straight again. Progress on the protection fields and fusion reactors is continuing, and making the command centers. We're already up to 19, so that is happening very quickly. Checking up on our orbs. Yeah, we're still making them. Just, I think the plan was it was going to take about 3 or 4 hours, so it's working. It just takes time. And we can always lag the factory even more by picking up any errant orbs that the biter attacks have created. And we'll basically just hit more or less this entire thing. It's going to be a lot of belts all at once, but this is the easy way of doing this. I do see that we tend to have quite a few of the fusion catalysts on hand, and that's because we have 50 fuel cells, and that's the limit. So right now we have 6 reactors, or at least 6 groups of reactors, and I guess I'll jump over there to show the logic. Ooh, the lag. But right now they turn on every 5 gigawatts of power. So the final set turns on at 30 gigawatts, and right now we're almost at 60. So certainly they'd all be on. But how many of these could we actually support? Well, I did the math, and it is roughly 4 reactors, or a single reactor group, for every one of these blocks. And we have 6 of them in total. 4 there and 2 there. However, the exact number is 4.67 reactors per group. And the more exact amount is for every 6 groups we have, we can support 7 groups of reactors. And right now we have 6 and 6. So technically, we can fit 1 more reactor setup in here. Although, it's not like they always go, which means there is some capacity for bursting. Certainly, we've got 100K of deuterium gas here, which is very capable of bursting. So because of that, how about let's add 2 more reactor groups. So this one, and this one. Whoop. Well, that answers the question about our power armor. We absolutely stopped that train. Well, let's set this logic then to 35 gigawatts and 40. And every time we change the number of reactors, then certain logic needs to be changed. At least so the display here is correct. First thing we need to do is tell it how many groups of reactors we have, which is 8. That will give us the correct percentage, and it used to be at 100 and now it's at 75. So that has been updated, and over here we need to figure out the exact numbers of fuel cells per reactor, and this is not per group but per reactor itself. And now we're going to have 32 of them, and that will update the numbers as required. So we'll let all that get placed, and when it is, we'll flip the switches. Alright, how is iron doing? It looks like most of the changes came through, but now we're starting to see our belt limitations at the supply side. We are going to need 164, and that is easily done by upgrading the rest of these belts here. Of course, then we are going to have input difficulties because this warehouse is going to get very low. But let's see what the output of all of these is first. It's actually 105, which is more than the blue belts we're using, surprisingly enough. So first thing we can do is get all of this upgraded. Those productivity modules really help. Alright, the rest of those belts are upgraded. Gonna have to wait on those still, but for now, we do have all of our inputs, which means this should get supercharged. And these belts are getting kind of full. Ultimately though, that's fine because we don't need all of them. We just need to get these 8 blast furnaces going at full blast, and they are. Although, it seems like they are quite low on coke. And that makes sense because we're going to need a lot more of it. Alright, those belts aren't maxed out anymore, so the coke should be fine. We may very well need a whole lot more of the limestone though, so we'll upgrade that too. And these machines can certainly go faster than they are. Meanwhile, the reactor groups are ready to go. So we'll jump in, flip the switch, and it's not turning on. There are 4 on signals. However, the one it's not getting, so we'll flip that one off again, is the status of the amount of gigawatts we're using, and that makes sense because it basically stops here. So it's hard to see through all these wires, but the green needs to get connected and the red also needs to get connected. So now that it is, all this should work and report correctly. So there we go, at 87% power. And doing this last one puts us up to 100% deuterium power. So now we have a higher power output than we can supply, at least at full blast. So our amount of deuterium gas will decrease over time. But that's fine. This is just a secondary power source, so it will run when it can. And around 60 gigawatts still. Alright, the belts made it. It looks like we are producing steel quite quickly, and in fact, we've caught up and it is essentially pulsing. So that's good. Although we are falling behind on the iron, it may not matter in the end, but we are running a lot of inefficient processes right now. So that's not good. And it looks like we just don't have the Jivolite. It's kind of hard to tell if this is actually maximizing this belt or not. But I suppose it is, because this is maxed out. So how about we upgrade this to purple? Just to make super sure that we are maxing this out. Because we are using a lot of inefficient ore methods right now. And the number is slowly going up. But in the end, we're still going to need a lot of iron from other sources. So I guess we'll have to see what it balances out to, because the very worst methods are the ones that are going to turn off first. So it's only going to have to tick up a few triage tiers higher than it is before it's going to stop making a lot of this junk. And it is certainly going up quickly. So it will probably balance itself out. So if we go to the end, it's kind of hard to tell. One of those is silicon and one of them is steel. But there are lots of steel drones coming by here, picking up resources. So I would expect this to be running, but it isn't. And that is because of the tungsten. So back to tungsten. What's not running fast about this? I mean, it seems fine now. Maybe something was limiting it before. It looks like it's the hydrofluoric acid, which is still low. But actually, I bet that makes a lot of sense, because when iron was running, it was using all of the least efficient methods, which were thus using all of the resources. And fluorite being a low priority resource, it had its input resources triaged away to those other ores, because iron is an important ore and it would have gotten priority in almost all situations. So that makes sense that while iron was low, it just kind of destroyed our ores. And you can kind of see that in the sense that some of these belts are just empty because the ores are simply not available. But why is this one not running at all? Well, no sulfuric acid, so that might be it. And coming down new sulfuric acid, it is indeed running. But also it's kind of pipe limited. So how about we connect these first two, that'll go into this one, and then the other two will go into the other one. And it looks like it's trying to catch up. But for now, how about let's do some all corners in here, which means we do have to change these numbers a little bit. And the performance of these would be a lot higher if we move these around a little bit. But looking at our distribution tank here, it looks like it is slowly but surely catching up on the sulfuric acid. So if we look at all this stuff, yep, it's all running again. The belts are starting to fill up. Iron has gotten much, much higher. So now the only methods that are running to make iron are the non-completely trash ones. Although power usage is way down, which means that research is way down. So something is not getting what it needs. And looking at everything flying by, it is, of course, the gold packs. And that continues to be the tungsten. And that is because no acid. Our factory is getting increasingly sensitive to fluctuations. We'll have to smooth it out the best we can. The bigger it gets, the more it's going to suffer from little issues and the longer it's going to take to catch up. It looks like it's going again. Probably it was just that sulfuric acid shortage. It was the lowest thing on the triage, so it just took longer for it to catch up. But stuff is catching up. And I guess as far as the deuterium fuel goes, we can just keep adding reactor groups until deuterium gas runs out, assuming we have the fusion catalyst to do so, which we do not have right now. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to continue to work on buffing up gold science. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.